deep inside a remote valley near Bergen, Norway. Two hikers set out for what should have been an ordinary morning. But within minutes, they stumbled upon a scene that would become one of Europe's greatest unsolved mysteries. A woman's burned body lay motionless among the rocks. At first, investigators believed they were looking at a tragic accident. They were wrong, because the closer they looked, the stranger everything became. Every label had been cut from her clothes. She carried no identification, no passport, no name. Then police discovered hidden suitcases. Inside were wigs, coded notes, multiple false identities, and a trail that crossed several European countries. More than 50 years later, no one has been able to answer one simple question. Who was the Isdal woman? Morning had barely broken over the mountains outside Bergen, Norway. A thick blanket of fog drifted silently through the Isdalen Valley, swallowing the rocky landscape beneath it. Locals had long given this place a haunting nickname, Death Valley, not because of legends, but because tragedy had visited these mountains more than once. On the morning of November 29, 1970, two hikers set out on what they expected to be an ordinary walk. Within minutes, their lives would become part of one of Europe's greatest unsolved mysteries. As they crossed the uneven terrain, one of them suddenly stopped. Something unusual lay between the dark rocks. At first, it looked like burned clothing. But as they moved closer, they froze. It wasn't clothing. It was the burned body of a woman. Shaken, they immediately contacted the police. Within a short time, the quiet valley transformed into an active crime scene. Investigators arrived expecting a tragic accident, perhaps even a suicide. But experienced detectives knew better than to trust first impressions. Every photograph, every footprint, every stone had to be documented before a single piece of evidence was touched. Then came the first discovery, a discovery that changed the investigation forever. Every identification label had been carefully removed from the woman's clothing. Not one, not two, every single one. Someone had deliberately erased every obvious clue that could reveal her identity. That wasn't panic. It wasn't coincidence. It was planning. And planning always raises a difficult question. Who was this woman? And why did someone want the world to never know her name? At that moment, the investigation stopped being about how she died and became a desperate search to discover who she really was. But investigators had no idea. The valley wasn't hiding the biggest secret. The real answers were waiting several miles away. Inside a collection of forgotten suitcases, police now faced a mystery unlike anything they had expected. The woman had no identification, no passport, no driver's license, no documents that could reveal who she was. It was as if someone had carefully erased her entire existence. For hours, investigators searched for anything that might lead them to her identity. The valley offered almost nothing. Then, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Detectives began contacting hotels across Bergen, hoping someone might recognize the woman. At first, it seemed like a routine step, until the phone started ringing. One hotel employee, then another, and another, all described the same woman. She was polite, well-dressed, soft-spoken, always traveling alone. But there was something unusual about her. She rarely stayed in the same hotel for more than a few nights. Then she would quietly disappear, only to check into another hotel somewhere else in the city. It was a pattern, A deliberate one. Investigators collected hotel registration cards from every location she had visited. What they found only deepened the mystery. Each registration carried a different name, a different nationality, a different signature. Yet every hotel employee insisted they had all met the same woman. Detectives immediately began tracing those identities. One address led to an empty building. Another belonged to a family that had never heard her name. Several simply didn't exist. Every trail ended the same way, with another dead end. Whoever this woman was, she had spent months creating a life that couldn't be traced. Then one witness remembered something that changed everything. A hotel receptionist recalled helping the woman store several suitcases at Bergen railway station. The information seemed almost insignificant until investigators arrived at the station. The luggage office searched its records. Within minutes, several unclaimed suitcases were placed on a table. The room fell completely silent. If these cases contained her passport, the mystery might finally be over. One detective slowly unlocked the first suitcase. Everyone leaned forward. Inside, they didn't find the belongings of an ordinary traveler. They found carefully selected items that suggested someone had been living behind multiple identities. Different wigs, several pairs of sunglasses, clothing chosen to change her appearance, maps marked with unusual routes, receipts from cities across Europe. And tucked between those belongings, a small notebook. Its pages weren't filled with names. They weren't filled with addresses. Instead, they contained rows of letters, numbers, and strange handwritten symbols. No one in the room could understand what they meant. But every detective reached the same conclusion. These weren't random notes. They were messages, hidden in plain sight. The question was, who were they meant for? Or perhaps, who were they meant to keep out? The suitcases answered one question. The woman had been hiding her identity. But they created an even bigger one. Why would someone need so many identities, unless they were hiding a life no one was ever supposed to discover? For investigators, the notebook became the most important piece of evidence in the entire case. At first glance, it looked ordinary. A small notebook, several pages, neat handwriting. Nothing about it appeared unusual, until they looked closer. Instead of names, they found combinations of letters. Instead of sentences, they found rows of numbers, dates, symbols, short sequences that seemed to follow a pattern. It looked less like a personal diary and more like a message written for someone else. Police immediately began trying to decode the notebook. Experts studied every page. They searched for hidden meanings, encrypted messages, geographic references, anything that could explain what they were looking at. Days passed, then weeks. The mystery only grew deeper. Eventually, investigators noticed something unexpected. Some of the coded entries appeared to match the exact dates the woman had checked into different hotels across Europe. Another sequence seemed to correspond with her departures. The notebook wasn't random. It was tracking her movements, but it wasn't written in plain language. Every journey, every destination, had been carefully disguised behind a system only its author seemed to understand. That discovery raised a disturbing possibility. This wasn't the habit of an ordinary tourist. It was the behavior of someone who expected their notebook might one day be found. Someone who didn't want strangers to understand it. As detectives reconstructed her travels, a remarkable pattern began to emerge. She had visited cities in Norway, Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, France, and Italy. She rarely stayed anywhere for long. She often returned to the same cities, but under different names, sometimes changing hotels after only a single night, sometimes leaving without telling anyone where she was going next. It was almost as if she was following a carefully planned route. But planned by whom? And for what purpose? Investigators searched for connections between the cities, military bases, ports, government facilities, international trade routes. Nothing produced a definitive answer. Yet one fact became impossible to ignore. Every move appeared deliberate. Every stop seemed calculated, and every identity vanished as quickly as it appeared. The notebook had revealed her movements, but it still refused to reveal who she really was. Then another discovery forced investigators to ask an even more dangerous question. If the notebook had been written in code, perhaps the woman herself had been living one. The coded notebook suggested organization, discipline, and secrecy. But the next discovery would make investigators wonder if the woman had been hiding far more than just her name. Could she have been living under multiple identities for a reason far bigger than anyone had imagined? By now, investigators were no longer searching for a single identity. They were chasing several. Every hotel record, every registration card, every travel document revealed a different version of the same woman. She never introduced herself the same way twice. In one city, she claimed to be Belgian. In another, she was French. Elsewhere, she presented herself as a traveler from entirely different parts of Europe. Even her handwriting changed. Her signatures looked different. The spelling of her names varied. It was as if she had rehearsed every identity long before using it. Police began laying every hotel record across a large table. One by one, they compared dates, names, and locations. Slowly, a timeline began to take shape. The same woman had crossed Europe repeatedly. Sometimes she arrived by train, sometimes by ferry, occasionally by air. But one detail stood out. Her movements never appeared random. She often returned to the same cities, yet under completely different identities. If someone had been following her, they would have struggled to recognize her. Witnesses described subtle changes in her appearance. On some visits, her hair appeared darker. On others, lighter. Sometimes she wore glasses. Sometimes she didn't. The wigs found inside the suitcases suddenly made perfect sense. They weren't souvenirs. They were tools. Tools that allowed her to become someone else. One hotel employee remembered something investigators couldn't ignore. The woman would often sit alone in the hotel restaurant, carefully watching the people around her. She wasn't reading. She wasn't relaxing. She seemed to be waiting. Waiting for someone. Or watching for someone. Another witness recalled seeing her leave a hotel in a hurry after receiving a brief message. She checked out within minutes, paid in cash, left almost everything exactly as it was, and never returned. The more investigators interviewed witnesses, the clearer one fact became. No one truly knew her. Everyone remembered meeting her. No one remembered getting close to her. She kept every conversation short, never shared personal details, never allowed anyone into her private world. It was almost as if her greatest skill was remaining unforgettable, yet completely unknowable. Then investigators uncovered another detail that changed the direction of the case once again. Several of the cities she visited had one thing in common. During the height of the Cold War, they were locations where intelligence agencies from East and West frequently operated. Was it just a coincidence? Or had investigators been looking at this case from the wrong angle all along? For the first time, the possibility of espionage entered the investigation, not as proof, but as a theory that could no longer be ignored. The woman had many names, many faces, and a travel pattern unlike any ordinary tourist. But if she really was connected to intelligence work, one question became impossible to avoid. Who was she working for, and what mission was important enough to erase her identity forever? By the early 1970s, Europe was divided. On one side stood NATO, on the other the Soviet bloc. The Cold War wasn't being fought only with armies. It was being fought with information. And in that silent war, spies were among the most valuable weapons. As investigators looked again at the Isdal woman's movements, certain details began to stand out. Several cities she had visited were more than popular tourist destinations. Some were home to military installations. Others were centers of naval activity. A few were locations where intelligence agencies were known to operate during the Cold War. Individually, none of these visits proved anything. Together, they raised difficult questions. Why would one woman travel so frequently between strategic locations? Why use multiple identities? Why carry wigs? Why write coded notes instead of ordinary records? Detectives began consulting intelligence experts. Officially, no agency confirmed she had any connection to espionage, and no classified document has ever publicly identified her as a spy. But privately, some investigators admitted the evidence resembled cases they had seen before. Not proof, just patterns that refused to disappear. Then another detail caught their attention. Several witnesses remembered that the woman spoke multiple languages with remarkable confidence. She could switch accents, adjust her pronunciation, and communicate naturally with people from different countries. For an ordinary traveler, that was unusual. For someone trained to move unnoticed across borders, it made perfect sense. Still, there was a problem. Every theory led to the same dead end. No government ever claimed her. No intelligence service acknowledged her existence. No missing operative was officially connected to the case. It was as though, if she had belonged to someone, they had chosen to remain silent forever. Years later, former intelligence officers and independent researchers continued debating the same question. Some believed she had been gathering information. Others suggested she may have acted as a courier, moving sensitive messages rather than collecting secrets herself. A few rejected the espionage theory entirely, arguing there simply wasn't enough evidence. And they were right, because despite the mystery, no investigation has ever produced conclusive proof that the Isdal woman was a spy. The theory remains exactly that, a theory. Yet one fact continues to trouble investigators. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to erase her identity. That much wasn't speculation. It was documented. The real question was, why? If she wasn't hiding a secret mission, what secret was worth disappearing for? The spy theory captured headlines around the world. But while everyone debated who she might have worked for Forensic scientists quietly began searching for something far more important. Not another theory, the truth hidden inside her own remains for decades. The case sat quietly inside police archives. The evidence never disappeared. But neither did the questions. As the years passed, investigators retired. Witnesses grew older. Some passed away. It seemed as though the mystery would remain unsolved forever. Then, science caught up with history. Advances in forensic technology offered investigators something they had never had before: the chance to re-examine old evidence with modern techniques. Nearly half a century after the Isdal woman's death, the case was reopened. Not because of a new witness, but because technology had changed. Experts carefully reanalyzed preserved evidence. Forensic specialists examined her teeth, bone samples, personal belongings, even the smallest details that had once been impossible to study. One discovery immediately stood out. The woman's dental work was unusually complex. The materials, the techniques, and the style suggested she had spent part of her early life outside Norway. It was one of the strongest clues investigators had ever found. But it still wasn't enough to identify her. Then came another breakthrough. Scientists used advanced isotope analysis to study her teeth. This technique can reveal where a person likely spent their childhood by examining the chemical signatures locked inside tooth enamel. The results surprised investigators. The evidence suggested she had most likely grown up somewhere in Central Europe, possibly near the border regions that changed dramatically after the Second World War. It wasn't a name, but for the first time, the investigation had a believable geographical starting point. Researchers began comparing this information with historical records, missing persons, immigration files, refugee movements, birth records. Thousands of documents were reviewed. Yet once again, every promising lead eventually disappeared. Then DNA technology entered the investigation. Scientists hoped genetic analysis could finally reveal her identity through relatives who might still be alive. Samples were carefully examined. International databases were consulted. The process generated new leads, but no definitive answer. The Isdal woman remained officially unidentified, even after decades of scientific progress. That may sound like a failure, but investigators saw it differently. Every new test eliminated old possibilities. Every analysis narrowed the search. The mystery wasn't standing still anymore. It was slowly moving forward. Then investigators returned to one question they had never fully answered. Not who she was, but how she died. Because some experts believed the official conclusion left important questions unanswered. Modern science brought investigators closer than ever before, but it also exposed new inconsistencies. When the investigation began in 1970, authorities eventually concluded that the Isdal woman had died by suicide. According to the official findings, her body showed signs of severe burns. Traces of sleeping pills were found in her system. Investigators also reported the presence of carbon monoxide, suggesting she had been alive when the fire started. On paper, the case appeared to have an explanation, but not everyone agreed. From the very beginning, some detectives believed the evidence raised more questions than it answered. One of the biggest mysteries was the crime scene itself. Why would someone travel deep into a remote mountain valley, far from roads and walking trails, to take their own life? It was an isolated location, difficult to reach, and almost impossible to stumble upon by accident. Then there was the fire. Experts questioned how it had started. Some believed the available evidence supported the official conclusion. Others argued that certain details remained difficult to explain. The debate never truly ended. Another question involved the woman's belongings. If someone intended to disappear forever, why remove every clothing label, yet leave behind items that could eventually be connected to them? It seemed contradictory. The more investigators looked at the evidence, the more they found themselves caught between two possibilities. Either the scene had been carefully staged, or they were looking at a series of extraordinary coincidences. Neither answer was satisfying. Years later, independent journalists, forensic specialists, and researchers revisited the case. Each brought a different perspective. Some supported the original investigation. Others believed important opportunities had been missed. But one fact united nearly everyone who studied the mystery. The evidence was incomplete. And incomplete evidence leaves room for doubt. Even today, there is no universal agreement about exactly what happened in Isdal Valley that November day. The official conclusion still stands. Yet public debate continues. Not because people reject the investigation, but because several key questions have never received definitive answers. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't whether the Isdal woman died by suicide, or whether someone else was involved. Perhaps the greatest mystery is that, after more than half a century, the evidence still allows both possibilities to be discussed. And that's what keeps this case alive. Investigators searched for a murderer. Researchers searched for a spy. Scientists searched for a name. But after decades of searching, the most important answer remained just out of reach. Who was the Isdal woman, really? Final chapter: the mystery that refuses to die. Next, if the evidence surrounding her identity was incomplete, could the evidence surrounding her death be incomplete as well? When the investigation began in 1970, authorities eventually concluded that the Isdal woman had died by suicide. According to the official findings, her body showed signs of severe burns. Traces of sleeping pills were found in her system. Investigators also reported the presence of carbon monoxide, suggesting she had been alive when the fire started. On paper, the case appeared to have an explanation, but not everyone agreed. From the very beginning, some detectives believed the evidence raised more questions than it answered. One of the biggest mysteries was the crime scene itself. Why would someone travel deep into a remote mountain valley, far from roads and walking trails, to take their own life? It was an isolated location, difficult to reach, and almost impossible to stumble upon by accident. Then there was the fire. Experts questioned how it had started. Some believed the available evidence supported the official conclusion. Others argued that certain details remained difficult to explain. The debate never truly ended. Another question involved the woman's belongings. If someone intended to disappear forever, why remove every clothing label, yet leave behind items that could eventually be connected to them? It seemed contradictory. The more investigators looked at the evidence, the more they found themselves caught between two possibilities. Either the scene had been carefully staged, or they were looking at a series of extraordinary coincidences. Neither answer was satisfying. Years later, independent journalists, forensic specialists, and researchers revisited the case. Each brought a different perspective. Some supported the original investigation. Others believed important opportunities had been missed. But one fact united nearly everyone who studied the mystery. The evidence was incomplete. And incomplete evidence leaves room for doubt. Even today, there is no universal agreement about exactly what happened in Isdal Valley that November day. The official conclusion still stands. Yet public debate continues. Not because people reject the investigation, but because several key questions have never received definitive answers. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't whether the Isdal woman died by suicide, or whether someone else was involved. Perhaps the greatest mystery is that, after more than half a century, the evidence still allows both possibilities to be discussed. And that's what keeps this case alive. Investigators searched for a murderer. Researchers searched for a spy. Scientists searched for a name. But after decades of searching, the most important answer remained just out of reach. Who was the Isdal woman, really? More than half a century has passed. Yet the Isdal woman remains officially unidentified. Her real name, unknown. Her family, unknown. Her reason for traveling across Europe, unknown. For most unsolved cases, time slowly erases the evidence. Witnesses disappear. Documents are lost. Memories fade. But the Isdal woman is different. The mystery has survived because every new discovery has created new questions instead of clear answers. The hotel records proved she traveled under multiple identities. The suitcases revealed wigs, coded notes, and carefully planned movements. Modern forensic science narrowed the search for where she may have grown up. But none of it answered the one question that mattered most. Who was she? Over the years, countless theories have tried to fill the silence. Some believe she was involved in Cold War intelligence. Others believe she was simply someone trying to escape a painful past. Some researchers argue she may have been connected to secret networks operating across Europe. Others caution that the available evidence is too limited to support such conclusions. And that's the challenge with this case. The facts are fascinating. The theories are compelling. But they are not the same thing. Perhaps somewhere, in an old archive, inside a forgotten government file, or in the memory of someone who never came forward, the answer already exists. Or perhaps, the truth disappeared with the Isdal woman herself. Today, investigators continue to welcome new information. Advances in DNA analysis and genealogy may one day uncover a relative, or reveal the identity that has remained hidden for decades. Until then, the Isdal woman remains one of Europe's most enduring unsolved mysteries. A woman with many names, but no confirmed identity. A journey across borders, with no known destination. A life carefully hidden, and a death that continues to divide opinion. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries aren't the ones with the most dramatic endings. They're the ones that leave just enough evidence to keep us searching, and just enough silence to ensure we never stop asking questions. Because in the end, this case isn't only about how one woman died. It's about how an entire life could vanish without leaving a name behind. Every clue told part of her story, but none of them revealed who she truly was. And perhaps that's why the Isdal woman remains one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries. Who do you think the Isdal woman really was? A Cold War spy? A woman hiding from her past? Or someone whose true identity may never be discovered?